Hello and welcome to another series. I'm calling this Lunchbox, Soapbox, i.e. Unpopular Sports Opinions. This is a chance for me to address what I believe to be an unpopular sports opinion while I'm on my lunch break. So, in honor of the current season, it is the holiday season, so Christmas season, the new year. But for sports fans, this is also the climax of the football season. We have all the college bowl games, and of course, we have the NFL playoffs starting soon, and then eventually the Super Bowl. If you haven't been keeping up with some other things going on in sports, ESPN also just released a multifaceted, multi-part series called Man in the Arena about Tom Brady, which has actually proven to be quite good. Even if you're not a Tom Brady fan, I think you would probably enjoy that series, so check it out. But what this has brought to my attention to this discussion today is another great quarterback from bygone days, the guy who was kind of considered the man before Brady came along, and that's Cool Joe Montana. Now, many people believe Joe Montana to have been the greatest quarterback to ever play in the NFL prior to the arrival of Mr. Tom Brady. I, however, am of a very different opinion. While I readily admit that Montana was great, I believe that Joe Montana not only was not the best quarterback of his era, I don't even think he was the best quarterback on his own team. So, let's talk about that and break that down. Here we go. Stay tuned. I'm going to take a break. Okay, back at you after the brief pause. So, there's no question Montana was a great quarterback, and the 49ers won several Super Bowls in their own right. But the thing you have to understand about this team is the success that Montana enjoyed, in my opinion, had far more to do with other variables, namely coaching, a unique revolutionary offense, and a fully stacked team, okay? So let's start with the beginning. Bill Walsh was the coach of the 49ers when Montana won the majority of his Super Bowls, okay? And it's no question that Walsh is considered to be one of the greatest coaches of all time. Hall of Fame coach. But more importantly, what Walsh is known for is introducing the West Coast offense into NFL football. Now, this offense had already been popularized at the NCAA level, notably at Stanford, where Walsh himself had worked at one point in time. But he brought it to the NFL, and it changed the landscaping of how football was played. Football historically had always been primarily a run-based game. And the central tenet of West Coast offense, or a spread offense, if you don't know, is around the premise that when you run the football, if a running back gets, say, a 6-yard gain or whatever, that's considered a positive, movement of the football. Whereas when it came to passing, the perception was passing was something you did further down the field, so that if a receiver only got a 6-yard gain on a play, it was kind of considered or thought to be a failure because it wasn't a long play. It wasn't kind of a big money gain. However, the reality is, statistically, there's no difference between the running back running 6 yards and the receiver catching at 6 yards. They're both 6-yard pickups. So this is the type of offense where instead of running all your receivers downfield, you started to run slant patterns, keeping receivers inside what was at that time in front of the defender or the secondary, and it also opened up their running backs to be able to move out and also act as receivers. Hence Roger Craig and his incredible success there, not only as a runner, but as a catching running back, okay? So this is all stuff that we now see all the time in the NFL, but this was revolutionary at that time, and it completely spread the offense out, and it became a quarterback-friendly, passing-friendly offense. And this is the offense that Montana got to be at the helm of and got to control and enjoy its great successes. And we see that happened, okay? And this is why this type of offense is now routinely used throughout the NFL across the board, okay? So that's factors 1 and 2. Third, we know that Montana had a slew of talent around him, not only Roger Craig, but arguably the greatest NFL football player of all time, certainly the greatest receiver in Jerry Rice, a stacked defense led by guys like Ronnie Lott, and the list goes on and on and on. So, sure, it's true that any great, successful team has a stacked team with a great coach, and he's usually running some type of really dominant offense or defense. But in the case of Montana and the 49ers, the reason why I believe my statement to be true is really the story of the Steves, okay? And while most people remember Joe Montana now as Cool Joe, the guy who came in and won those important playoff games and won those Super Bowls, They also probably forget his other nickname, which is Glass Joe, and that's because Joe Montana was continually getting hurt. That's the reason why they brought in the first Steve Young, okay? And then Steve Young at one point got injured as well, and they had to bring in other Steves. So those Steves are essentially Steve DeBerg, Steve Young, as we mentioned, and another Steve known as Steve Bono. Now, why do I bring these guys up? Well, the reality is, if the success of a team, or an offense in this case, is largely predicated on an individual player, when that player is removed from the lineup, what you'll see is a substantial fall off from the team. Maybe they don't necessarily lose, but they certainly don't put up the numbers and the stats that they would normally have put up when that superstar was in the lineup. However, if you go back and look at the 49ers throughout those years, when Montana was out, because he was Glass Joe and he was injured often, you'll see that there's almost no fall off, okay? In the case of Steve DeBerg, he still put up great numbers, so much so that after Steve Young became the primary backup, he went on to have a pretty decent career. It was a serviceable career in the NFL, but just got offered starting positions based off the numbers he was putting up in San Francisco. And interestingly enough, years later, the exact same thing happened to Steve Bono, who was a total unknown. Steve DeBerg had been in the league for a while, and he was kind of known as a journeyman quarterback, so he had a little bit of clout around his name. But this Steve Bono guy, no one knew who he was. He came in after Young suffered an injury and threw up crazy, crazy numbers. He was at the top of the NFL in stats for the few weeks that he played, and then he too got offered these great contracts, went on to go play for other teams, but could never create that type of success as a quarterback. Well, there's a reason for that. It's where he's playing. So what's the point? As good as Montana was, every quarterback that came in, even backups, to play with that team and that offense under that coaching had enormous success. And those same quarterbacks, when they went on to play for other teams, did not enjoy the same success. And I think that that is an important point to make, because if you look at the other great quarterbacks from that era, and there are many, from Dan Marino, John Elway, Boomer Esiason, Warren Moon, Randall Cunningham, and the list goes on, Jim Kelly. If those guys weren't in the lineup, those teams did not perform anywhere near the status or state that they did when they were in the game. When Montana was out, they not only kept up their level of play, in some cases they actually played better. And that brings me to my final point. Steve Young, it took him a while to get into that position, but if you actually look at his career stats, he put up better numbers than Montana. Steve Young was actually the better quarterback. And I think the coaching staff at the 49ers would agree with that. But Montana was such a popular player, and he had been the franchise player in place, and they already had Super Bowls under him. And really, from a lot of the resources that I've read, a lot of the keeping of Montana lineup had more to do with Montana's relationship with the owners of the team, who were big Montana fans, and they were friends with him, than it did with the coaching staff and who they believed to be the better quarterback. Well, as we know, that ended up being the first and biggest quarterback controversy in the history of NFL, who is going to be the 49ers quarterback, because again, when Montana did get injured and Young was brought in, Young actually performed better. And while they did stick with Montana for another season or two, they did end up releasing him, and then he went on to play for the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, at that point in time, they could say, well, he's getting older and it's Steve's chance to come in and play, but Montana still had several good years left, even in Kansas City. In fact, leading Kansas City also to I believe an NFC or what are the Chiefs, AFC championship game? I don't remember because I can't think right now. But point being, he still was a good quarterback at Kansas City. Don't get me wrong. So I'm not knocking Montana. I'm just saying I don't think he was the best quarterback of his generation, and I don't even think he was the best quarterback on his team. I think Steve Young was better, and I think Steve Young's career stats after he took over the team are better. The only thing that Montana has over Young is he has more Super Bowls, but he played longer for that team in that starting position. And it also should be remembered that several of the Super Bowls that Montana won, the last two, most importantly, Steve Young actually played for a lot of the snaps in those two seasons. So Montana's great, but unpopular opinion, not the greatest of his generation, not even the greatest on his own team. Have a great day.